Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am a Karen Pryor certified training partner. I live in Santa Fe with my two huskies, Ume and Jerry. I've been working with dogs since 2015, and I've worked with a variety of species, including donkeys, goats, llamas, and cats. And one of my favorite things about training is that any animal can learn with positive reinforcement. So this is Jerry. Jerry is the newest addition to my home, and he is a 16-month-old husky. He's very excited about the world and has a great enthusiasm for everything. This includes meeting other dogs and people. And one of the things that we've been working on is helping him on walks, leashed walks, including neighborhood walks and hikes, so that he can manage some of his excitement and husky screaming. And one thing to know is that everything that I'm chatting about today is things that I've been practicing with my dog, who is very excited about dogs and people. We don't really see any kind of fear, anxiety, or aggression with Jerry. So if those are things that you're experiencing with your own dog, just be mindful as we go through the presentation that these are things that apply to very excited teenage dogs. Okay, so these are a few of the challenging behaviors that I've been experiencing on our walks, and they might be typical of most teenage dogs. If any of these look familiar, drop a comment in the chat. If you have any other challenging teen behaviors you're working on, drop a comment in the chat so that I don't feel alone in these struggles. So the first thing that we see a lot is jumping on the handler during walks. Also play biting or biting hands. I also experience jumping on our other dog during walks, trying to play. And then this last video has a little bit of vocalization. So if you have a dog in your home that might be sensitive to dog sounds, you might want to turn the volume down. But we also experience vocalizing and pulling. Here, not responding to cues when he's in this state. We had just seen a few horses and a couple off-leash dogs here. Let's see. Pulling and barking for access to every dog. Yes, all these behaviors, especially pulling and jumping. Glad I'm not alone. So I think about this as finding compassion within the chaos. The chaos obviously could be something like vocalizing due to excitement when seeing other dogs. And my role as the guardian is to be curious about why my dog is vocalizing, learning how to manage triggers, and then also helping my dog return to baseline or a more calm state. Let's see. My teenage dog jumps on me at the beginning of walks. Yes, lots of teens love jumping. So what is a teenage dog? I think in general, teenage dogs are around 7 to 18 months. However, this varies with breed or size, and we could say that teen dogs are anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. There is not a ton of research on teenage brains, but I think it's safe to say that their brains are under construction and still developing. When your dog is a teenager, it can feel like your puppy is going backwards. Maybe some of the things that you've been working on start to fade the behaviors are not as strong. And part of the reason why I think we could be experiencing some challenges and frustration is because our dogs are really still puppies and engaging in puppy behavior, but they can be the size of an adult dog. We might also be spending less time with our puppies as they age. I think sometimes people might take time off of work. They might set up more management when puppies are really young, but then as they get older, some of that might start to fade and change. I've also noticed that teenage dogs sleep less. So sometimes puppies can simply seem easier because they sleep a lot during the day. And teenage dogs have quite a bit more energy than baby puppies. And then the last thing that I've noticed is that teenage dogs tend to shift from a handler focus to having more of an environmental focus, meaning that teenage dogs might not be quite as preoccupied with their guardian, and they might start to notice all the cool and exciting things that happen in the environment. Let's see. Yes, 3-year-old lab feels like a teen. In a way, I would embrace that. So I think the task is to learn how to love your teenage dog. I don't have any statistics on this, but I will say that a lot of the dogs that come in for training with me happen to be around this age. And when I've worked in shelters, I've seen a lot of dogs get rehomed around this age. So I tend to think that if we can kind of just embrace the season of a teenage dog, that we can learn to be more compassionate and understand that it's just a phase. I really like this quote: knowing the physiological reason behind some behavior challenges should make it easier for us to be patient and understanding of the hard time our teenage dogs are going through. So keeping things like this in mind when my teenage dog is doing something that really frustrates me helps me be compassionate and try to problem solve how I can guide my dog through this kind of tumultuous teen time. So exercise for teenage dogs. Jerry, based on his breed, needs to engage in daily exercise, which means we go for hikes or walks every day. This might not be true for every dog, so be mindful about your individual dog and their needs. And something that I've noticed with teenage dogs is that they could need more exercise or they could be needing less exercise. It really depends on how your dog responds to the type of exercise you're doing and also how they react when they come home. So if you notice that when you go for a very busy neighborhood walk, you come home and your dog has the zoomies and is maybe like grabbing pillows or humping things, that could be information that you might want to change the kind of exercise that you're doing. In my experience with my own teenage dog, if we do a lot of exercise and we experience a lot of different triggers, he has a hard time settling when we get home. And I either need to be mindful that I've got to help him calm down a little bit, or I might want to change the kind of exercise that we're doing. So these are all questions that we should be asking ourselves when we live with teenage dogs. Do they need more or less exercise? What kind of exercise are we doing? And what does our dog do when we come home from a walk? Sorry, there's a little bit of barking here. So what do we need for a successful walk? I think the first thing to think about is equipment. And I have a list of resources that I shared. And if you are tuning into this presentation, we will email you with the equipment that I like. But every walk, I'm going to have a treat pouch. I like my dog to be wearing a harness. And then when I'm doing walks, our leashes are a minimum of 10 to 12 feet. And I like to make sure that my dog has the ability to sniff and explore when it's safe to do so. Another thing that I think we need for a successful walk is choices, meaning what choices am I making as the guardian before we go for a walk? So the first thing I like to do is assess my dog's preferences. What kind of treats do they like? Do they prefer toys to treats? And then I'm also going to make sure that I'm selecting the environment wisely and appropriately, which really just means what is going to set up my teenage dog for success. In general, I try to avoid very busy places with teen dogs. So I'm not going to walk to a coffee shop. I'm not walking to a restaurant or somewhere that I think is going to be too overwhelming and too stimulating for my teenage dog. And then the last thing that I'm thinking about is what reinforcement is available in these environments where we're choosing to go for a walk. So I'm always going to have treats on me, but am I selecting an environment where my dog can sniff? Is there grass? Or are we going to a parking lot where there's concrete? How can I make sure that there's lots of things going on so that my dog can enjoy the walk? Another thing we need for a successful walk is to consider our mindset as the guardian. So observation skills and being able to see signs of stress or that your dog's arousal or excitement might be starting to build. I also think we need to understand that our dog is developing and growing, and they might be experiencing a fear stage. So this, a couple slides back when I showed Jerry vocalizing and pulling, this is what happened right before. Hi. So if you notice anything in particular, go ahead and drop it in the chat. And I'll tell you kind of what I started to notice here. He is air sniffing. It's great that he's sniffing and exploring the environment, but he also turns around and alerts to me. And so he was sniffing horses and wildlife. The reason why I think that this is important to be aware of is because a lot of times it can feel like our teenage dogs might jump or have an outburst seemingly out of nowhere. Sometimes the body language can be super subtle. And this was really a clue that he was about to encounter something that was going to be super exciting. And my role as a guardian is just to maybe step in and either keep it moving. We're going to talk a little bit about what skills we might use, but I really want to be sure that I'm mindful and observant of my dog's subtle body language. There are so many skills that we can be practicing when we are talking about loose leash walking, but I just tried to distill what I think are the top 3 skills and what could be really simple to practice at home. The first one is checking in with you and making it exciting and fun. Sometimes you'll put a leash on a dog and go for a walk, and it feels like they don't even know that there's a human attached to the other end. So I like to teach my dogs how to check in with me. I also like to teach my dogs to walk at my own pace, which I think is crucial for teenage dogs because part of the frustration with teenage dogs is that they might be walking a little bit more quickly because they taught them to walk with us as they were puppies when they had little baby legs. And now their legs are longer and they're walking faster. And we just always want to be sure that we're thinking about teaching our dogs to walk at our pace as they grow. And then the last step is helping our dog come back to baseline, helping them relax or chill out a little bit. So the first thing that I like to work on to make chickens valuable is The Up and Down Game by Leslie McDevitt. And the way that we practice this game is we always want to practice inside and make sure that our dogs have the pattern down first. So you stand so that your dog is facing you. I like to use a plate so that it's a little bit more clear to my dog where the food is going to be. And then I'm clicking when my dog finishes eating or when he looks up at me. This is what it looks like inside. After I've practiced this a few times in my home, I'm going to try taking it outside, and I might even try practicing around a mild distraction. So in this video, there are a couple people getting into their car outside of the frame. And you'll notice that it's a little bit more difficult for Jerry because he wants to go over and say hi to them. So I'm just choosing to click because I know that he's going to look back at me. And I realize that it's still a little bit too challenging. So I'm going to change my position so that it's easier for him to look at me. And I might even be creating a visual barrier so that he can't see the people on the other side of me. This is a really simple, valuable game that I would even think about practicing on a daily basis. And then I would be mindful to see if my dog started checking in with me more on walks or outside our home. So this is another simple, fun game for leash walking. And I'm always going to practice this in my home first. I've seen Chirag Patel do this, and this is how I learned about this game. But there are lots of trainers who utilize this training game. So I'm just calling it food at my shoe. And it's easy for me to remember that I'm just going to walk, food goes down at my shoe. So I place the food at my shoe and I take a couple steps forward, and then I'll put food by my shoe again. I like to think about clicking or saying yes when my dog is moving. I like to practice this at home several times. This is such an easy, fun movement game that you might even want to practice it like kind of during the witching hour or when your dog has a lot of excess energy. And the next step is going to be practicing outside in a low distraction environment. Same idea, food goes down at my shoe. And we're just practicing eating food and walking together. So that after I practice this a few times in my home and in a low distraction environment, I'm going to try taking it somewhere where it might be a little bit more busy. We have cars, other dogs. Anytime I'm going somewhere new, I'm always going to ask for a little bit less from my dog. So you'll see in this video that it's more challenging for Jerry when we go into a slightly more exciting environment. So I'm going to show him food and toss it in the ground. And I'm just trying to help him out a little bit by showing him where the food is, showing where I'm going to toss it, and not necessarily yanking on the leash or changing anything with my behavior, just trying to set up my dog for success. Scatter. So when my dog is jumping on me, or when my dog is maybe trying to get treats or just kind of can't disengage from trying to bite my hand or play with me on a walk, I like to do a treat scatter. I like doing treat scatters because it encourages my dog to interact with the environment, and it kind of gets them a little bit less focused on me. Even though this seems so simple, I highly encourage people to practice this at home first. If you don't have a snuffle mat, you can also use a towel. And it's pretty simple. I just say scatter, and I scatter food on our towel or snuffle mat. Scatter. And then I'm going to practice this outside too for a few reasons. One, I want that word scatter to have some meaning. And I also want to make sure that my dog is comfortable eating outside. So this is what it looks like. Scatter. After I practice this a few times, I then will probably try to incorporate it after my dog is jumping on me or seems like he's getting really excited. So those are the top 3 skills that I like to work on at home to start thinking about good leash walking behaviors. But what happens when we're talking about distractions like other dogs, runners, bikers, things that my dog is going to pull and try to get towards? So the first thing to think about is you don't have to work on loose leash walking and distractions at the same time. I have found that leash walking starts to fall apart when our dogs are faced with distractions. So I try to work on these things separately. And I also try to have fun and be really playful when I'm trying to ask my dog to not lunge and pull towards another dog. I want my dog to think that turning away from another dog can be just as fun. And I think this is a skill. It's a challenge for me to remember to be really fun and playful and try to match my teenage dog's energy. But I found that since I started doing that, I've seen a big difference. So what I like to do is try to locate different parks, areas where there could be 1 or 2 other dogs, but I can still get a good distance from those dogs. And I'm also going to choose a time of day when I know that my dog is not too amped up. I don't want him to be hungry. I've maybe already done our neighborhood walk and he's already eaten a meal. All these things are going to make my dog have an easier time when we're trying to turn away from distractions. So I'm going to say here, and then when my dog orients towards me, I'm going to run and be really, really playful. I might play with food. I might toss food. I'm going to repeat this several times, and we spend about 20 minutes a day working on these skills, and that's it. We're not working on leash walking. I'm not expecting my dog to stay at my side. It's all about having fun when we turn away from other dogs. So here's what it looks like. And this kind of delay, especially with teenage dogs, I'm not worried about. I don't need to say here and have my dog immediately whip around. If I say here and my dog doesn't check in with me, that just means that I might need to step into his sight line, which I'm about to do here. I'm going to change my behavior so that I become more relevant. Yeah. And I'm also going to sound very ridiculous. There is a dog in the background here, which you can't see. I like to keep about 20 or 30 feet from other dogs when I'm working on this. So it's great that we can practice that when we're not going on walks. But what happens if we're on a walk and we can't get away from a distraction? This could look like if you're walking down a busy street and another dog is coming towards you. The first step is thinking about management, which just means modifying the environment so that we can prevent unwanted behaviors. The first thing I'm going to do is see if I can get further away or if I can cross the street. Sometimes I might hide behind a car or a tree, whatever I can do to just immediately create distance. That's a short-term solution. And in the long term, I would start to think about selecting where I walk. So am I going to go on a neighborhood walk or a hike? Typically, if I go on a hike, I'm going to encounter less or different kinds of distractions. And then I like to hike or go for walks very early in the morning, or I'll go later at night because there tend to be fewer people out. I also choose low traffic areas and I avoid on-leash greetings for a variety of reasons. For the most part, I just don't want to reinforce that kind of like pulling, jumping, lungy behavior. I don't want my dog to think that when we're walking on leash, it's a time to meet other dogs. I just want the leash to be a cue that we are walking together. So before I pick, let's see if I can move this so it's easier to see. Before I pick any kind of management or before I decide to cross the street, I like to look at my dog's body language so I can make a determination of how I need to support my dog. This is a really helpful graphic from Grisha Stewart. And the metaphor is basically keep your dog on the sand so that they're not underwater. The video that I showed earlier in the presentation of the air sniffing could be one example of this kind of blue, okay, or even yellow. But I'm going to always try to avoid this orange or red. And I like to try to use management when my dog is in the blue or the yellow. So here's another example of what yellow looks like for us. You can see Jerry looks pretty normal. There's no vocalization, pulling or yelling happening. However, what did start to concern me in this session was, and we can watch it again, he is constantly scanning the environment and he is taking food, which is great. But as soon as he eats, he goes right back to scanning. And that's not anything I need to be alarmed by, but it's just information about what kind of management I might need to use here. So in this instance, we immediately made some distance. We tried doing a little bit of play. But if your dog is doing this kind of scanning, even if they're eating food, I wouldn't be surprised if after that you saw some like jumping behavior, maybe the vocalizing behavior. So try to be mindful of what yellow looks like for your dog. Yes. So before we get into the yellow, fingers crossed, if we can avoid that. These are a couple different management behaviors that I practice at home, and then I utilize them when I see other dogs on the street. The first one is called mark and move. And I learned about this from Grisha Stewart, but there could be some other trainers who are doing it. Yes. So we'll watch the video and then chat about it. Yes. Very. Yes. Yes, good job. So usually when I'm outside, I'm using a verbal marker because I don't necessarily have enough skills to also use a clicker. Yes. And that's fine. Basically, all I'm going to do is use my marker word, and then I'm going to move as soon as I say it. And I'm going to try to move away from the other dog. And I'm going to use food to see if I can get my dog's head to move. If my dog won't actually walk with me, just having them turn their head is sometimes enough. I do always want to practice this at home first, because I don't want my dog to start thinking, oh, we're playing this game, let me look around for the other dog. All right. So the second thing that I like to practice when we see other dogs is what I call a harness hold. This is pretty similar to something called Hold My Hand by Emma Parsons. And this is another really crucial one that I think should be practiced at home first. So we practice this at home, and I'm really just leaning over to make sure that my dog is okay with me touching their harness. I'm not even really fully putting my hand on it. I'm just trying to see, what does my dog do if I move towards them? And he's staying still, so that's what I'm clicking and feeding him for. If my dog wasn't comfortable with this, I would probably work with the trainer and make sure that your dog is okay with handling. So now we're starting to add a little bit of movement, and I'm going to practice that a few times indoors. Here's what it looks like outside in a low distraction environment. We're just practicing my hand on the harness and walking. And I have food right there so that he'll follow the food. So the main reason I like using this harness hold is because sometimes with teenage dogs, I've noticed with Jerry that we could be on a walk, and on Monday, he's totally fine walking by a bike or a runner. Then on Tuesday, he is lunging, and teenage dogs are just going to have up and down days, and that's okay. I'm just using this more as a preventative in case I'm worried that my dog is going to lunge at something that he thinks is very exciting. So the last step here, there's a barking dog in the background, is just practicing the harness holds when we're around other dogs. There were some off-leash dogs here that weren't approaching us, but I didn't want Jerry to rehearse the behavior of lunging. So if I just feel like I need a little bit of extra protection, that's when I'm going to use this harness hold. But again, if my dog had any kind of sensitivity to handling, or maybe had any fear issues, I would probably focus more on practicing this at home before we did it around other dogs. Okay, so a big one is, what if my dog won't eat on walks? So the first thing really to consider is the difference between high value and low value. High value, I'm going to think human food, things like hot dogs, chicken, cheese. Baby food that doesn't have things like garlic or onion in it is a really good option if you can get it in those squeeze tubes. And then I also really like bark pouch. Low value food is going to be something like kibble or any treats where the first couple ingredients might be like a byproduct. So anytime I'm going on a walk, I'm always thinking about using high value food. So eating is a behavior, and we might think it's just food, my dog knows how to eat and they've been doing it their whole life. But we do need to make sure that our dogs understand and know how to access food in specific environments. So that's why I think it's a good idea to practice things like saying scatter and feeding your dog, and practice walking and eating, because those skills are actually really different than eating at mealtime or eating out of a puzzle. So two kind of common things that we might see with teenage dogs is that they might take food and spit it out, or they just might not eat at all. When your dog is spitting out food or refusing food, they are probably over threshold. And what that means is you're too close to another dog, or you're too close to something that your dog wants to investigate. Usually we can tell also through some body language, and sometimes just offering food to our dog can kind of be a barometer about how stressed they might actually be. I also think it's important to remember that even though we want our dogs to have good eating behaviors, it is maybe unrealistic to think like my dog has to eat in every single environment. So sometimes lowering our own expectations can help with some frustration. So in the short term, I would say, could you cross the street and will your dog take food? Does 2 feet of distance make a difference? Can you hide behind a tree? Can you run around and play? What are some things that you can do to immediately change the environment? Long term, if you go somewhere and your dog isn't eating, and that happens every time you go out, my question would be, how can we find an environment that is slightly easier? So if our dog isn't eating on dog walks, it could be helpful to divide it into short-term solutions and long-term solutions. And then these are some questions that I ask myself when I'm in a new environment. So is it my dog's first time there? And do they need time to acclimate? Is my dog comfortable and relaxed? Is my dog approaching me? Is my dog moving freely or sniffing? Or are they all the way at the end of the leash and just scanning? What are the potential distractions that I could work on later? So is it other dogs? Is it squirrels, birds? And then is my dog, if my dog is eating, is he snatching the food out of my hand, or is he eating the same way that he might be eating at home? Because eating behaviors can shift or change when we change the environment or when there's more exciting things happening. All right, in summary, so some of the naughty behaviors that we see with our teenage dogs might come out in the wash. So be patient and try to find compassion. Again, I just think about this kind of like the season of Jerry. And I'm not a big fan of summer, but there are a lot of things that I can do during the summer that are fun, that I can enjoy and just kind of lean into the warmer weather. And winter will come around again soon. Teach your dog leash walking behaviors inside your home first. Seems a little counterintuitive, but that's the #1 recommendation. And you don't have to work on distractions and leash walking simultaneously. In fact, if you are constantly working on distractions while you're trying to do loose leash walking, that could probably be a detriment to your leash walking skills. And lastly, if your dog isn't taking food, I would try to create more distance, change the type of food that you're using, or start to select easier locations. So these are all the resources that I would suggest looking at if you're looking for more in-depth information about leash walking. Leslie McDevitt, any of her books are great. I would also look for Control Unleashed certified instructors. I'm in her mentorship program right now. Kiki Yablon has a lot of really great resources on leash walking. So does Grisha Stewart and Chirag Patel. And then Ken Ramirez and Lindsay Wood Brown are two people that I love hearing them talk about eating and eating behaviors. And Erica Beckwith is a trainer here locally that I've been working with. It just in terms of setting up different situations for Jerry, I think that we can never underestimate how helpful it is to have another trainer on our team. And this is where you can find me. So you can find me on Instagram at Ume Mama Training. You can email me. I work with clients virtually. And then I also see clients in person in Santa Fe, Rio Arriba, and Taos County. So if you have any questions or you'd like to know where to go from here, please feel free to reach out, and hopefully people got something valuable here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. So our first question, what do you advise when not working on loose leash walking, but trying to exercise those teens?
Great question. So I think it probably depends on your dog's individual needs. And I would say rather they some dogs stress up and some dogs stress down. So for some teenage dogs, really like going hard on exercise could be detrimental. What I've noticed when I'm trying to exercise my dog, Jerry, or I just feel like he really needs to get some energy out, finding a fenced in yard, like a sniff spot, and playing Go Find It. Having him run around and then come back to me and chase treats is one of the best ways that I get a lot of his energy out. I also like going on longer hikes with him and picking a location where we're not going to see a ton of dogs. And I always use a really long lead so that we don't have quite a bit of pulling and he can sniff and explore the environment.
Awesome. It looks like I'll give it another second in case folks have questions.
Yeah.
But you covered a ton of information and so many good training games. I think it's really easy to be like, just, get your dog's attention. It's like, no, there's a million things you can do. This is really a lot of great techniques for teenage dogs and for other dogs as well. Quick reminders for folks. Again, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you can make a donation, that allows us to bring on awesome speakers like Sarah. Our next webinars, we've got a couple that aren't scheduled quite yet. I've got one coming up about muzzle training. So that's going to be really fun. I've got one on desensitization and counter conditioning that someone's going to do for us. And then another one about dealing with dogs who are reactive in crowded spaces. So lots of fun stuff coming up. Stay tuned for those, and I'll have the webinar posted tomorrow. Another question we got: when my 9-month-old pup goes for a walk, he pulls. I turn in the opposite direction each time, but he's not getting it. Any tips?
Really good question. Okay, so the first thing I would say is I would be curious about what my dog is pulling towards. And that would be the first thing that I would think about. I personally think having to turn in the opposite direction every single time my dog pulls can be really frustrating for me as the guardian. So if I know what my dog is pulling towards, if it's like something that he wants to sniff or smell, I could use that to my advantage. If I'm using a longer leash, sometimes I'm eliminating pulling. But another thing that I like to do is try to do something called like upfront reinforcement. So I might kind of like stash the environment right outside my home so that there's lots of fun stuff to smell. So that when we go for a walk and we leave our house, we're immediately just sniffing and practicing that leash behavior. If my dog was consistently pulling around the neighborhood a lot. I would maybe just focus on training games. I would maybe just focus on food at my shoe and check in. I also like Super Bowls. But really the first component is, what is your dog pulling towards and how can you give them access to that so that they don't have to pull? If you have more questions, you can also email me. That's
Awesome. And then another question, is it okay to sometimes use a long line like you do with Jerry before your dog has mastered leash walking?
great question. Yes, I think you have to use a long line in order to teach leash walking. Kiki has a really good blog on this, but sometimes when we're using a short leash, pulling is just going to happen because the leash isn't long enough. And every time our dog has the opportunity to pull, that behavior could get stronger. So I actually think you have to use a long line to teach leash walking. Hope
There
that
you
answers.
go. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for all of the awesome questions. And again, Sarah, thank you so much for this great information. I should be able to have this posted up tomorrow, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy your day.